Hello everyone, I hope you're well. Welcome back to my channel. I asked you guys on Instagram which video you wanted to see from me, and a lot of you said a video about the imposter syndrome. So that is exactly what we're going to be doing today. We'll be taking a look at what the imposter syndrome is, my personal experience with it, as well as some tips that have helped me manage it. So let's start with the basics. What is the imposter syndrome? The imposter syndrome, or what psychologists like to call the imposter phenomenon, is when individuals experience intense feelings that their achievements are undeserved and they worry that they are likely to be exposed as a fraud. Self-doubtedness is at the very core of imposter syndrome, and regardless of how much they achieved, people with the imposter syndrome feel like they do not belong, they do not deserve anything that they have, and most importantly, that they're this close to being exposed as a fraud. The imposter syndrome comes with a variety of traits and conditions. Imposter syndrome tends to come with anxiety, depression, perfectionism, and for me personally, it comes with both anxiety and perfectionism. I've always been a very anxious person. I've learned to deal with it. It's not always easy, but I do think that most of it stems from my imposter syndrome. As for perfectionism, you can see that in two different behaviors. One of them is procrastination, and the other one is over-preparing, and I personally tend to do both. So when it comes to work that I don't feel super confident in, I will procrastinate that. But when it comes to meetings and situations where I have to speak to people, I definitely tend to over-prepare. I remember recently having a 15-minute meeting that I think I was anxious about for the entire day, and that meeting was at 3 p.m. and I prepared from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. for a 15-minute long meeting. One of the worst things about the imposter syndrome is that people who have it tend to feel like they're the only ones who feel this way. But actually, about 70% of individuals have experienced at least once in their life imposter syndrome, which when you think about it is a pretty high percentage. But the reason why people feel this way is because no one actually talks about it, and this is exactly why I am making this video today. I want to take the time to talk about my personal experience with imposter syndrome because this is something that I have lived with for a few years now, and I know that a lot of students watch my videos, so I definitely don't want you to feel like you might be the only one feeling this way. So for me, I think my imposter syndrome started when I started law school. Not when I got into law school, but rather when I actually started law school. I couldn't see myself in anyone that I was at school with. I felt like everyone had different interests than I did. I felt like everyone was smarter than I was. I felt like people that I was studying with had brains that were wired to study law and that I didn't, which when I think about it right now is absolutely ridiculous. I felt like no one had the same ambitions as me. People had very different career goals. I could not see myself in anyone that I was going to school with, and that was really hard for me. And that is exactly, I think, when my imposter syndrome started. And I think I was a little aware of the fact that I had the imposter syndrome, but I thought it would go away. I thought that once I became a lawyer, once I was done with school, I thought the imposter syndrome was going to go away, and boy, was I wrong. It actually got a lot worse when I became a lawyer because I kept putting myself in very risky situations career-wise. Putting myself into these situations required a lot of confidence for me. And I guess that's also the very tricky thing about the imposter syndrome, is that you tend to go from these very ego-boosting thoughts to complete self-doubtedness. And that is what's been happening ever since I became a lawyer. As I kept taking advantage of new opportunities, as I kept growing with my practice, my imposter syndrome also grew along with it. And so ever since I became a lawyer, so about 3 years ago, my brain has been tricking me into thinking that I don't actually deserve anything that I have right now. And honestly, for a while it was manageable, but I can distinctly remember, I think, peak imposter syndrome for me, if you can call it this way. About a year, I think, after I started practicing, people started asking me to give conferences. I would get really anxious when giving conferences to my clientele, and I learned to get over that. But then what happened is that I would get asked to give conferences to other lawyers, or in situations where other lawyers would be present. And so I remember very, very clearly this one situation where I actually submitted a topic to an event. So, when I was saying ego boosting thoughts to complete self-doubtedness, this is like the perfect example of it. I submitted a topic to a, tech conference. They thought it was great. They asked me to give the conference. And when I got there, I learned that there was going to be another lawyer in the room attending my conference. I was speaking about a topic that was related to tech law and privacy law, and he was actually teaching internet law at McGill, and that really freaked me out. So anyways, I try to get over it. I'm there, I'm giving my conference, and I ask people if they have any questions, and I see this lawyer raising his hand. And that is when I thought, that's it. I thought,
this is the end. This guy is going to expose me. I probably said something that was wrong. He's going to tell everyone my career is over. This guy teaches at McGill. He's been practicing for a lot longer than I am. People at faculties are going to know about me. Like, my career is over. This is over.
And so obviously I freak out. And I try to keep calm, but it was really, really hard. And so I asked this person, yes, what's your question? Please go ahead. And he ended up being such a nice guy, and he ended up saying that I was right and that people in the audience should listen to what I was saying. And that's when it hit me. That's when I realized how bad my imposter syndrome was. I was afraid that this lawyer, who had taken a day off to come to this tech conference and who wanted to come specifically to see my talk at that very event, was going to expose me for the fraud that I was, when really he was just the most supportive person ever. And so ever since that day, I'm a lot more aware of my imposter syndrome, but it does follow me everywhere. As I said, I thought it would go away, and now I'm understanding that it's probably never going to go away. But I've definitely learned a few tips that have helped me manage it so I don't become completely useless as a human being. So tip number one is to actually talk about it. As I said before, one of the main reasons why people have the imposter syndrome and people feel like they're a fraud is because no one actually talks about it. So I find that saying my thoughts out loud definitely helps me rationalize them. And I definitely encourage either speaking to people that you're close to about this, but also to your peers. Because while speaking to people who are close to me helps me rationalize my thoughts, speaking to my peers actually helps me realize that I'm not the only one in this situation. And this is really hard for me because I do tend to isolate myself professionally speaking. I like to work alone. I always have. I'm not a big physical networker. It's just not in my personality, so it definitely takes a lot for me to speak about this to lawyers that I meet. But I remember that the last time this happened, the lawyer that I was speaking to also confessed to feeling this way. And I find it really funny because this guy had handled this very, very important art law case, and he was shocked when he was asked to do that. He didn't understand why they were asking him, and I definitely saw a lot of myself in that, because every time someone asked me to do something, I'm like, don't you guys have other lawyers you could ask, or can't anyone else speak about this topic? Which is absolutely ridiculous, I know. But it definitely helps you feel like less of an imposter when you realize that other people feel this way too. My second tip is to stop comparing yourself, because it is not doing you any good. There is absolutely no point in comparing yourself, because you will never hold others to the same standards as you hold yourself. You can't do that because you don't have as much information about other people as you do about yourself. You live with yourself, so you know what you understand, what you don't understand, you know your flaws, you know your qualities. You see yourself being doubtful about your abilities and what you can accomplish or what you have accomplished, but you don't get to know any of this about other people unless they say it to you. And even if they do, you will never be able to see it to the same extent as the information that you actually get about yourself. It's useless, it is not helping you, and it's also not rational. My third tip would be to remind yourself once in a while of everything that you've actually accomplished. Oftentimes we go through life day by day, we do this, we do that, and we never actually take the time to just step out and look at everything that we've accomplished. And I always realize that, funnily enough, when people ask me to write bios, whenever I have to give a conference somewhere, whenever I'm invited on a podcast or something like that, whenever I write a bio where I explain, who I am, what I've accomplished, the type of people that I represent, this is when I always realize the extent of everything that I've accomplished, and I find it to be very comforting. And it definitely helps me feel like less of an imposter, because at some point you have to understand that you have achieved those things because you're fully capable of doing so. So once in a while, whenever you feel like you do not deserve anything that you have, whenever you feel like you are a fraud, you're an imposter, take the time to just step back and think about who you are, what you've accomplished, what you're actually proud of, and remind yourself of these things. My fourth and final tip would be to change the way that you speak about yourself. The words that you use to describe yourself definitely have an impact on the way that you see yourself. And I'll give you an example. A lot of times when I get invited to conferences and I tell people about it, I will say, they've invited me to speak about X topic because apparently I'm really well versed in this topic. Apparently, I am very well versed in this topic. That is absolutely ridiculous. You would never talk this way about one of your peers, ever. So why would you use these words to describe yourself? Apparently, I know about this. This is very easy. Everyone could have done it. I don't actually know anything. This comes easily to me. Everyone knows so much more than I do, and I don't actually know anything, so I don't understand why I'm here. They could have asked anyone else. All of these phrases are things that we need to stop using when talking about ourselves. And talking about yourself in a positive way is definitely a muscle. It's something that you develop over time. The more you do it, the better you become and the easier it actually becomes for you. People with the imposter syndrome have a very hard time talking positively about themselves, and whenever this happens to me, I like to think, what words would I use if this was something that had happened to one of my friends or one of my peers? What words would I use to describe what is happening to them, and what would I answer if they were to describe themselves the way that I tend to describe myself? After a while, you realize that the words we use to talk about ourselves are absolutely ridiculous. Let's just be kind to ourselves. Living with imposter syndrome is hard enough. I think that the kinder you can be to yourself, the better. So that was it. This was my video about the imposter syndrome. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you guys could see yourself a little bit in everything that I spoke about, and that me talking about my personal experience with it helps you realize that you're probably not a fraud. You're just worried you are. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and let me know which videos you would like to see from me. Bye guys!